Hi, folks. Welcome to this Takshashila conversation. Right before we begin, I want to take a couple of minutes to introduce Takshashila to you guys, and then Anirudh will begin the conversation. All right. Welcome. Takshashila is a network think tank and a school of public policy. We are physically located in Bangalore, but operate around the world since 2010 over the internet. As an independent, non-partisan policy research think tank, we are engaged with India's relationship with the world, transforming how India is governed and exploring the intersection of technology, economics, and politics. Please take a look at our public policy education programs that are tailored specifically for people like you. They're all online and you can take them from anywhere at a time when movement is restricted. We have both short one-semester certificate programs as well as a year-long graduate program in public policy, defense, and foreign affairs. Admissions are open for the next intake for us one-semester certificate programs. They begin on 29th August, so please get your applications in before that. To connect with us, please subscribe to our newsletters and podcasts, and depending on your interests, we deliver sharp and timely analysis that allow you to reduce information overload and get to the heart of the story. That's a little bit about Takshashila. I think it's time to begin now. Anirudh, over to you.
Thank you, Rohan, and thank you everyone for joining us this Friday evening. Our guest today is Sudeep Chakravarti, who is among South Asia's leading commentators on conflict and conflict resolution. He's a veteran journalist with nearly 30 years of experience, and he's a best-selling author of a number of books, including Classy, The Bengalis, and of course the award-winning Red Sun and Highway 39, which have similar subject matter to what we're discussing today. Sudeep has previously spoken about these issues at a number of fairly prestigious places, including the Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad and Indore, the Army War College, the Indian Naval Academy, the CRPF Academy, the University of Bonn and Simon Fraser University, the Deutsche Bank's Global Investors Meet, and the Economist Intelligence Unit CEO forums, as well as the Gateway House. So I'm sure that you can imagine that we have a whole lot to learn from Sudeep today. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and over to you, Sudeep. If you could please share your screen.
Thank you. Good evening, friends. Just a quick check. Am I audible to everybody? Anirudh?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Excellent. We're good to go. Delighted to be with all of you this evening. Thank you for taking the time to join me and join Takshashila Institution, which I'm actually very fond of because I know the people who set it up. And I really like the kind of work that they're doing. So when we talked about this evening and the subject for this evening's discussion, for me, it was not a difficult decision to agree. So here I am. What we're going to do is that I'm going to take you through a topic which I think, a subject which I think is grossly underthought. I wouldn't say unthought, I'd say underthought. And grossly underrepresented, because right now in the throes of the COVID crisis, as we are 3 months into lockdown, 3 months and more into lockdown, with the situation where we're talking about the economy tanking, when we're talking about jobs, joblessness rocketing, we're talking about all these things, and you have geopolitical overhang and geo-economic overhang, and in that, I think the situation of sort of the socio-economic, what are the effects of socio-economic dislocation and complete derailment in India, I don't think we're paying enough attention to that. And to my mind, that is sort of deeply endemic to India's internal security. And we're at a stage in COVID with our dealing with COVID-19, or our inability, if you will, to deal with COVID-19 in several respects, that seriously makes me afraid and makes me really concerned about the sort of the domino effects of where we're headed from here. Very simply, let me begin with, actually, before we just go on, just a quick heads up about the root causes, you know, ladies and gentlemen. When you're talking about an estimated 130 million people who will lose their jobs in the first tranche, if you will, in the first flush of COVID-19 in India, of which fully 40% are estimated to be blue-collar workers. We're talking about, therefore, what, 52 million people, in excess of 50 million people, even give or take a couple of million. That's a huge knock-on effect. And in this, you're also talking about several tens of millions of knock-on effectees, if you will, in rural India. These are not just small-town India, but in rural India. And this is where typically your unrest, your rural unrest, which is typically away from urban India, out of sight, therefore out of mind. This is where these things brew, and this is where things blow up. And then we wake up in urban India when it reaches us. And in this particular case, you're talking also about knock-on unrest, possible industrial unrest. You're talking about unemployment-led unrest in urban India. I think these are very serious issues. I don't want to sort of fly the kite of paranoia here, but I think we need to be seriously concerned. And this is what this evening's conversation is all about. So let me take you through the two key aspects of internal security in India right now, which is basically the issues centered around what we know as the Maoist rebellion, which again, if you see, it is completely receded from most people's minds, if not their memories. And the other aspect is the huge cauldron of northeastern India. And here I am leaving aside Jammu and Kashmir because that needs its own webinar altogether, which I'm happy to address at a later point. But I just want to talk about these two key aspects, which are directly related to indignities, joblessness, despair, hopelessness, incipient anger, which can be leveraged by those who look out for newer recruits. This is again not necessarily flying the kite of paranoia here. It's a sort of a marriage of inconvenience or convenience, ladies and gentlemen, the way it works. When people are dissatisfied, when they're in deep despair or hopelessness, they react to what we discuss as policy, public policy, or effects of public policy. When it travels down the pyramid to the intended recipients of that final public policy, the citizens on the ground in stressed areas of urban India, in stressed areas of rural India, that's where your public policy truly, that's your trickle down, and that's where unrest brews, as I said in the beginning. So this is what it's all about. So let me take you through this, this aspect of, when you look at the flashpoints right now, you're talking about, this is just like an introductory visual, which to acquaint you with the geography or the political geography about what we're going to be talking about today. As you can see, the red stars, the larger red stars are marked in the sort of the premier territories of what is known as a Maoist rebellion, or in academia, or in think tank circles, or at the Ministry of Home Affairs, it's called left-wing extremism. Jammu and Kashmir is far to the north, and to your east, you will see relatively smaller stars in Assam, Nagaland, and Manipur. So leaving aside Jammu and Kashmir, these are the political geographies that I'll be addressing this evening in matters of what really drives my concern. And this is a standard visual, friends of, you'll recall this from actually several years ago, a friend of mine, Namas Bhojani, who took these photographs, this image for the New York Times, made it famous. This is typically your Maoist rebels. This is just to acquaint yourself with the kind of people we're going to be talking about, who are also, by the way, citizens of India. Let's not forget that. Here we're not talking about Vietnamese or Peruvians or Chinese or Kazakhs. We're talking about citizens of the Republic of India, many of whom, or some of whom, just don't like the way the Republic of India is run at present. That's essentially the bottom line. This is typically what they do. This again to just acquaint yourself, acquaint yourselves with the kind of geography that they operate in: forested areas in central and eastern India, southern India, southwestern India, southeastern India, and also increasingly to the north of Chhattisgarh, to say the lower aspects of Madhya Pradesh and the southwestern aspects of Uttar Pradesh. This is typically where they operate. And this is to give you an example about the kind of, again, a visual representation of the kind of geography we're talking about. This is a map actually of the LWE theater from 15 years ago. And I'm doing this deliberately just to let you know that even though the trajectory of the movement or the intensity of the rebellion has reduced over the years, and you will soon see that in another map I will share with you, this was at its absolute peak, if you will, friends, in 2005, 2006. You don't need me to detail it for you. The legends are there. It's legible, I hope, and visible quite clearly. So you can see it for yourself. The red is the high intensity zones. Moderately affected is in orange. Marginally affected is in green. And targeted, which is like at that point of time, what was in the pipeline, is in blue. This is essentially the spread at this point of time. In 2005 to 2008, actually, it more or less remained the same. And it was fully across a third of India. As you can see, it affected more than 200 districts of India at that particular point of time. This is, again, to acquaint you with what is known as the Red Corridor, again, an aspect of the political geography of this rebellion. This was made popular by L.K. Advani, who, in a way, said, this corridor runs from, from Tirupati right up north to Nepal, and to Tirupati to Pashupati was his quote. And it became popular, and that's how the Red Corridor came to be. But there is, as you can see, a corridor which is very important for the rebellion. It is also very important for counters to the rebellion. We'll come to that in a bit. This is what it looks like now, to 2019. So you can see that from then to now, the geography of the rebellion has severely shrunk. And this is on account of a number of issues, which is better coordination among states to deal with the central government. Earlier, it was essentially left to the states to deal with it. There was very little coordination with New Delhi and the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is, I don't need to tell you this, but it is the national nodal agency to deal with such crises or such rebellions. But the fact is, and we shouldn't feel that because in these 15 years or so, that the political geography or the combat geography or the conflict geography of the Maoist rebellion has shrunk, it necessarily means that it's all over. It's far from over, because the Maoist rebellion, I would like to remind you, has been around in one form or another, in one degree of intensity or another, since May of 1967. So that's 53 straight years of the Maoist rebellion as we know it in the modern Indian era, if you will, that has been around. So even with all of India's growth, all of India's prosperity, all of India's worldly wiseness, and so on and so forth, and grand footsteps into the world out there, the fact is that the rebellion kept pace. You see, it exists, which is my point exactly, is that there is a root, there is a deep-seated root of governance issues which causes the birth of these movements, and misgovernance more than anything else, my friends, keeps such movements alive, keeps such anger and such rebellions alive, and it draws people to such rebellions in a time of crisis, in a time of personal indignity, so on and so forth. And that brings us to the red flags of today's, when there is, again, I take it back to the joblessness issue and the COVID-19 knock-on effect. Imagine the vast pool of negative energy that something like this could unleash. And you don't need tens of millions of people joining up in the rebellion. You need 100 more, you need thousands more. And it just spreads all over again despite the best efforts of the government of India and its agencies in the Indian states, which are now working in far better concert than they ever did in combating the Maoist rebellion, which is one of the key reasons why it has shrunk to this particular extent. This is this gentleman, Ganapati, whose former name is Muppala Lakshman Rao, is your former General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Maoist, which is the preeminent Maoist entity as we speak. It was formed with the coming together of two large Maoist organizations, the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist People's War, erroneously called the People's War Group, and MCCI, the Maoist Coordination Committee of India. They came together in 2004, and in September, they formed CPI Maoist, and Ganapathy essentially was the general secretary. Prashant Bose, who was the head of MCCI, essentially was number two. Now, Ganapathy led the greatest growth, and CPI Maoist also saw its greatest decline, which has happened since 2009-10 under Ganapathy as well. Ganapathy is now close to 70, and in 2018, he gave way to a gentleman called Basavaraju, who his formal name is Nambala Keshava Rao. He was the head of the Maoist, CPI Maoist Central Military Commission, and he took over formally in November 2018 from Ganapathy. So he's your go-to guy. He's the chief of the rebel movement right now as we speak. Now, this is a snapshot that I need you to appreciate what we are dealing with here. This is the political geography. These are the people who run it, and this is the terrain. And you can see that this is the map of Chhattisgarh in physical relief. It is literally the heart of India. And when you go through this, I'm just focusing further in, to bring you to a sort of a tight focus into what I would call the heart of the action, which is called the junction. If you see, this area is essentially what is known in security parlance or in the region as a Dandakaranya region. So here you have Chhattisgarh, here you have eastern and southeastern Maharashtra, you have northeastern Telangana, and you have southwestern Orissa. Altogether, this is the Dandakaranya region, which remains the epicenter, the key laboratory and the epicenter, as we speak, of the Maoist rebellion in India. So this is your key theater, and the map that I showed you in 2019, this is where it happens. I want to keep, when I show you these visuals, I want to keep taking you back to my socio-economic displacement on account of COVID-19. I talked about over 50 million blue-collar workers being estimated to lose their jobs, plus migrant laborers. A lot of them go back to these regions. They go back to Orissa, they go back to West Bengal, they go back to Bihar, they go back to Jharkhand, or rather, millions of them have already gone back. They go back to Telangana, they go back to Andhra Pradesh, they go back to Maharashtra, to Karnataka, so on and so forth. And this is to UP, to Bihar. These are your key geographies of the Maoist rebellion. These are your key geographies of Dalit movements. These are your key geographies of militancy, traditionally for several decades, as we've seen from the 1960s onwards. And we need to keep that in mind. And when you look at, I wanted to also acquaint you, as I talk about COVID-19 and its knock-on effects, to the conflict geography of it, because the two need to be married. And when I zoom in further, this is basically the region known as Abuj this, and to the north, a little over the Raughat area, the Narayanpur, this area. And some years ago, Pranab Mukherjee, when he was the president of India, made a big show by going to Narayanpur and going to the Ramakrishna Mission. The fact is that this entire area was a sort of a no-go zone at that point. Now, the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Forces, and their specialized anti-Maoist arm, the COBRA, Combat Battalion for Resolute Action, they operate in this area. So have ITBP, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. So have BSF, the Border Security Force. So have various battalions raised by particular states who are there, and of course the commando groups of various police forces of the states of India. They operate against the Maoists in this area. Now, and this is where a lot of the action happens. When I'm saying action, I mean combat action. This is the zone where you had, when it all blew up in 2019, when 76 CRPF troopers were sort of killed in this area. Sorry, I'm going in this area. And then this is the area in which in 2013 Mahendra Karma, the Congress leader, and VC Shukla and the whole lot of them were assassinated. Then you have incidents here, you've had incidents here, and this highway is sometimes called a highway to hell, is essentially where a lot of the attacks happen, and Malkangiri, here, Telangana, the northeast Telangana. So this is your geography, and this is where people can also hide out in, folks. This is where your center is. This is also where the current leadership, including Ganapati, who's in sort of retirement, semi-retirement, this is where, this is the region where Basavaraju and his colleagues, the top leadership of the CPI Maoists, are thought to be holding out in, and in this area, and in this corridor that runs across from Chhattisgarh, and this area around Orissa. So these are the sanctuary areas for the Maoist leadership, which till now the government has not been able to penetrate in any significant way, even though it has, through concerted action in the areas of Jharkhand and Bihar, in other parts of Orissa, in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, through the Greyhound forces, in Maharashtra, in UP, in MP, and in Bihar. Peripheral action and penetration of the movement has brought numbers down through deaths, through surrenders, through illness of Maoist leaders and cadres, people just walking out of the movement and surrendering themselves to various governments. So the movement has lost several thousands of people over the last 15 years, but there's still, the estimates of the core is up to 5,000. That's a lot of people. So when you look at the accessories of the movement, the support system, so on and so forth, it can go up to 10, it can go up to 12. So, it is a substantial force we're talking about over here right now, which still exists. And they draw people on account of indignities, on account of despair, anger, displacement, dislocation, joblessness, retribution, or for all kinds of reasons. Again, please think about the knock-on effect of COVID-19 here. And I believe that even though the government of India has done so many things, including, for instance, there is now the fashionable thing these days in security circles or in closed or sort of home ministry circles. This government is fond of its acronyms. So in April 2017, when 25 CRPF troopers were attacked by Maoist rebels, just weeks after that, on 8th May 2017, Rajnath Singh, who's now the defense minister, but he was the Minister of Home Affairs at that particular time, announced with great fanfare something called Samadhan, S-M-A-M-A-D-H-A-N. Unfortunately, of course, acronyms by the central government presupposes that everybody speaks Hindi fluently and will figure out the double entendre, or what Samadhan, which is actually a solution, what it's supposed to mean. So it's actually, and this you need to understand as well, friends, because when I talk about the political geography or the combat or the conflict geography of something of this rebellion, which continues to bedevil India for India's own mistakes. Let me be very clear about that. Nobody is feeding this rebellion or this anger or this movement. We as we as Indians are, and India is. I mean, this is a movement and despair and dislocation in a way of India's own making and of India's own sustenance. So you need to understand how the government is reacting to that as well, because even when I talk about socio-economic displacement and anger and despair related to COVID-19, we need to also understand the mechanics of the government and the state fight back, if you will, or the counteraction to this rebellion. So Samadhan, S was supposed to be smart leadership. A was aggressive strategy, is supposed to be aggressive strategy. M in Samadhan is motivation and training. A, the next A is actionable intelligence. The D is, which is the most bizarre, D stands for dashboard-based KPIs and KRAs. I'll come to that later in a short while. H in Samadhan stands for harnessing technology. The third A is for action plan for each theater. Nice. And the N for Nancy is no access to financing. This was the construct of Samadhan as grandly announced by Mrs. Singh in May 2017. But what does it amount to? It basically was a rehashing of a strategy and tactics already in place, put in place by the former United Progressive UPA government, UPA 1 and UPA 2, which was actually this so-called Samadhan in the state that it was re-announced in 2017 had already kicked in from 2010 onwards, when, especially after P. Chidambaram took over as Minister of Home Affairs from Shivraj Patil. So it kicked in after that, really. So that's what we're talking about here. So it was basically just rehashing for optics. It was pretty much the same thing. Smart leadership is smart leadership. It's a given, you need it. Aggressive strategy, okay, we go get the Maoist rebels, understood. And the government has been doing that, following up on that. Motivation and training is essentially modernization of the police forces, great training imparted by former army officers to police forces across India or in these Maoist theaters. It also includes Cobra, which was a force that was developed out of CRPF directly and was introduced into Chhattisgarh in 2008. I was actually in Raipur when Cobra was inserted, to use a security parlance, into Chhattisgarh for its initial operations, if you will. And actionable intelligence is a key thing, because this is something that had bedeviled the security forces, because the Maoist rebels have always been deeply integrated with the local communities in which they operate or which they penetrate. And even the local police, and certainly the paramilitaries who operate all across India and are dragged and dropped across India, they simply didn't have similar empathy with the local people. So the Maoist rebels have always had an edge with the local community. Whenever state security forces have developed a strategy to penetrate with their own counter strategy, like the Greyhounds did very effectively in Andhra Pradesh, for instance, they managed to decimate the Maoist rebellion. That's the way it worked. When the Cobra, CRPF, and West Bengal State Police imploded effectively the Maoist rebellion in West Bengal, which effectively ended there so far. I mean, it's still bubbling, as the map of 2019 showed you, but effectively it's ended since 2011, 2012. But there are vulnerabilities for that to erupt at any point of time, because people's anger and people's despair don't look at public policy. They don't look at security policy. They look at livelihoods. They look at their day-to-day survival. They look at their indignities, and then you have the pot boiling, and that is what recruiters look out for. I want to make that point very, very clearly. So, and again, all this Samadhan or the rehashing of the strategy has actually led, which is why you have the map shrinking. You have actually led to a 3 to 4-fold increase in surrenders since 2013. You've had, the rebel deaths have doubled in the same period. Encounters have increased by almost 50% in the same period, which basically means, which actually demonstrates that security forces, paramilitaries, and specialized forces are actually not staying in their camps or their holdouts, which they used to before, but they're actually going about conducting patrols, conducting operations. So when you go, the chances of you encountering the other increases, and therefore you have a jump in incidents. So that has actually increased in that sense. Now, but the point is, I want to keep pointing you to the anger that keeps these movements running. Even with all the concerted effort of the central government and the state governments. Let me take you now another aspect of solutions. I call it be positive. The thing is that the map that is in front of you is actually another key strategy which Samadhan ironically doesn't address, which is actually, to my mind, one of the key methods, the key approaches to bringing back any form of governance back to the stressed Maoist geographies, the political geographies, and turning them into what I would call governance geographies, development geographies, essentially what Republic of India and its executors of the will of the Constitution of India were supposed to provide the citizens of India in the first place. That's governance I'm talking about. It all boils down to that, really, or the lack of it. Now, the visual in front of you shows a map of districts. You see the reds, the blue lines are the state lines, the red patches are, the yellow lines are the district boundaries within these various states. These are essentially areas that were plucked out to be offered a combination of something that is called security-related expenditure, or SRE, or details of which you will find should you go visit the Ministry of Home Affairs website and look at their annual reports or their action taken reports. Effectively, what this does is that it throws in several tens of crores of rupees per year per district for beefing up security in police station areas and police stations themselves, not just mud huts or mud walls, but proper situations with protection, with modernized forces, modernizing weaponry, training, you name it. It also is to do with, SRE is also supposed to help with building roads. It's supposed to help with increasing healthcare, it's supposed to help with increasing telecommunications. Essentially, this is all an expansion, if you will, of something that happened in, again, UPA 2, when Jairam Ramesh, who was the Minister of Rural Development, after his stint as a Minister of Environment, Jairam actually, this is something that people they forget, that he was a guy who actually pushed something called the Saranda Saranda Action Plan and the Saraju Area Development Plan in Jharkhand and in Bihar. So it worked on a hub and spoke, essentially, that the forces would come in, take over a hub, a district headquarters or a conflict zone. It would, in security parlance, be sanitized with the help of security forces, CRP, Cobra, you name it, in conjunction. Then from that foothold, from that toehold, you would have governance hubs developed, healthcare, administration, schools, education, governance, outreach, judicial system, judicial outreach, which had basically disappeared in these Maoist zones. And then slowly they would radiate outwards and then spread through the district and then sort of encapsulate that district with governance. That was essentially the blueprint which Jairam, in concert with his colleagues in the Ministry of Home Affairs and in the Ministry of Defense. So the MOD came into the act because they provided what Rajnath Singh called actionable intelligence and harnessing technology, which included tapping mobile phones, it included operating UAVs over, say, the Dandakaranya region, you name it, and it's out there. And so it was a combination of things. So this is something, even with be positive, the fact is it can become be negative. It can very quickly, the positive sign can just become negative in a matter of months, in a matter of years, without you even knowing. Please recall, ladies and gentlemen, that till 2006 to 2008, how many of us really paid attention to the Maoist rebellion? And since then, it's as if we can't stop talking about it. It's as if we can only talk about what are the fashionable hashtag of today, urban Naxal, which is, by the way, a creation of the Bharatiya Janata Party and its propaganda unit, and publicized by endlessly by the gentleman currently who's the Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Amit Shah. So in fact, Mr. Shah popularized, if you will, urban Naxal, and the people in concert hashtagged it, and it became a trend. And this is important because, again, COVID-19, let me go back. There is actually an urban perspective plan of the CPI Maoist, which goes back to the early 2000s. There is a strategy or was a strategy, and there remains a strategy, if at all they can function with it, to break into stressed urban geographies where there's poverty, where there is hopelessness, where there's despair, where there's dislocation. Again, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 knock-on effect. They had various strategies. I'm not going to read out each point. I just want you to glimpse these and just sort of just park them at the back of your mind as we carry on talking. These are basically penetrative activities, if you will, overground and underground, and then sort of build in a classic Maoist sense, build an overall structure sort of from the outside in as well as the inside out, and then build a movement around that, okay? And this, I'm quoting this directly from the Urban Perspective Plan, which was actually developed by CPI MLPW, which was adopted in a way by CPI Maoist. And they had administrative tasks, political tasks, they'd given themselves military tasks, all very organized, very well thought out. These are, my friends, very, very bright people in the rebel ranks. Please do not underestimate the rebel ranks. They've been around for 53 years against against one of the most powerful countries in the world in terms of its numerical superiority in police and military forces in the world. And they've been around for 53 years. Please, let's not write them off with the flick of our ideology as much as the flick of our fingers. Please remember this. And so this is essentially the blurb, if you will, the brochure blurb. And because one needs to feed off the other. So your urban Naxal is actually, ladies and gentlemen, there is a kernel of truth, which I think has been elevated to the level of political paranoia, and it has been misused to my mind with UAPA and with other legislations in concert with state level legislations as well, to actually shut down criticism in many, many ways. So while some true urban Naxals have been caught in the net, and this is something that the left liberal is sometimes at great pains to deny as well. Let me just say it out there. There are people who are sympathetic to the Maoist rebellion and or have been ideologically been ideologues, so on and so forth, of the movement, who are in the net. But there are dozens of others who are sort of innocents who have nothing to do with the Maoist movement, who've been sort of caught in the same net and put behind bars, some of them for 2 years now, and it's as if they've thrown away the keys. That is not right, ladies and gentlemen. And if there is a knock-on effect and paranoia increases and political vindictiveness increases here, and I'm not talking center or states, I'm saying political vindictiveness, period, in general. I'm making a generalization here. Then India's jails, there'll be no space. In any way, our jails are overcrowded. I can tell you that there'll be absolutely no space in our jails anymore at all if this paranoia goes berserk. So all the more reason why we need to plan properly, why we need to plan ahead. Let me take you through the other geography. We've done a little bit with the Maoist rebellion. Let me take you to the other hotspot in Northeast India. And forgive my pun, resisted. I can see Anirudh smirking. And is everything all right, Anirudh? So far, so good. And I'll just wrap this up quickly.
Sure, we have about 20 minutes, Sudeep. So because I'm sure that the audience has a lot of questions.
Yeah. So I'm just going to wrap this up very quickly. But again, I need you to see the geography. This will take me not more than 5 to 8 minutes. I'm going to sort of, you see Nagaland, I put Nagaland in a primary spot because the Naga peace process, or the derailed Naga peace process, as I call it, is currently the top of the pops. So I put Nagaland at the center of my Northeast map. But of course, in that, you have, if you see the geography around it, you'll see Manipur, you'll see Assam, and you'll see Myanmar, which is a part of the action as well. And what has happened right now is that, I mean, this is the gentleman who's actually the father of the Naga rebellion, way back from the 1940s, 1950s, Angamiza Pufizo. The current leader of NSCN IM, or Isaac Muivah, is Thuingaleng Muivah, the M in the IM, with whom or with which organization the government of India and this is the Nagaland, the greater region, which is why the map that I showed you earlier makes sense. What I showed you in the last map, Nagalim, which is the intended political geography of this promised land of the new Naga nation, includes all of the states, parts of Assam, parts of Arunachal, parts of Manipur, and parts of Myanmar, as you can see in this map. Now, they have a flag, and this is basically what I'm talking about. 3rd August 2015 is when the peace deal with IM was signed. They've been in ceasefire since 1997. And this was a follow-up, ladies and gentlemen. And I can't stress too much what's going on here. You have Mr. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, leading Mr. Muivah by the hand. And the optics is excellent here. Behind, to Mr. Muivah's right, you have the present National Security Advisor, Ajay Doval, who is credited with much of the action that we have. And here you have what I would call the other photo op, and Anirudh and friends, forgive the other pun, I couldn't resist. Here you have Mr. Muivah actually exchanging the so-called framework agreement for peace with the interlocutor of the Naga peace process at the time, R.N. Ravi, who was at that point of time also the chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee and subsequently became the governor of Nagaland. And he continues to be the interlocutor. But that is in complete disarray. It is Mr. Ravi, 1 week ago, shot off a letter to the Naga government accusing the Naga government being in cahoots completely, which is in a way true, but in complete concert with the Naga rebels and helping run the Naga parallel administration. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, the Naga peace process is in absolute shambles. The recruitment of the rebels continues. This is their camp, which you can see Camp Hebron is temporarily closed because of COVID-19. There's lockdown. So actually you can apply to be a visitor in the camp, but now they won't let you in. And as you can see, this is near Dimapur, Camp Hebron near Dimapur over here. And this is also the Army 3 Corps headquarters, which is aimed at all Northeast. It's actually aimed at Myanmar. It is aimed at China. And as the crow flies, it is basically 25 to 30 kilometers from Camp Hebron. And you can see, this is the conflict geography we're talking about. So the camp exists. Mr. Muivah and his colleagues are in the camp when he's not being feted by the government of India in his other residence in Lodi Estate. I can tell you where the address is, but it'll be impolitic of me. But I can tell you that I can show you. If you are nice to me, I'll give you the address and you can sightsee yourself in Lodi Estate. It is not far from the India International Center and Khan Market. Take my word for it. So you have Camp Hebron here. This is the political geography. And when I'm saying that they're recruiting, you have a situation where you have this whole area, the camp, the political headquarters, the firing range. This is all active rebel area right now by agreement with the government of India. So it's in shambles, but and again, vast amounts of people have moved out from urban India, from white and blue collar jobs, and have gone back to northeastern India, providing another pool of socio-economic dislocation, which can be leveraged for negative energy, vast pool of negative energy going ahead if we are not able to come out, if you're not able to resurrect economic activities soon enough, if you're not able to resurrect socio-economic confidence soon enough, you're talking about another vast pool of negative energy, ladies and gentlemen, with its own identity, with its own dynamics, completely removed from the Maoist theater in the heart of India, the Maoist equation. This is its own equation in Northeast India. And this is at the borderlands of China, of Myanmar, a geopolitical sweet spot. So this is Manipur, another hotspot where there are 6 major rebel groups, which is called the Coordination Committee, which are in active war with the government of India and the state of Manipur. Nagaland to the north, Myanmar to the east, Assam to the west, and Tripura to the west, and Mizoram to the south. Again, a geopolitical sweet spot, a fulcrum, a pivot of India's Look East policy and India's Act East policy. It can all go down the drain like that. Emotions can run very high in Manipur. These are ladies protesting against Indian Army depredations some years ago. Violence can be brutal, immediate, and stunning. Occasionally, this gentleman in the photograph died soon after. His lower body doesn't exist anymore on account of a bomb explosion. This is CORCOM, ladies and gentlemen, the coordination committee, which was formed in 2012 with 6 major rebels groups from the Manipur Valley, the Meitei groups. Operation Yening is actually something that happened in 2017 when the coordination committee attacked a convoy of Assam Rifles in Chandel district of Manipur and killed several Assam Rifles troopers. And they took full credit for it. This is a combined unit of CORCOM, ladies and gentlemen. It still exists despite pressure by a government of India and Mr. Doval himself with the counterparts in Myanmar to squeeze the rebel strongholds in Myanmar, where you have the Naga rebel strongholds, where you have the Manipuri rebel strongholds, where you have the Assamese rebel strongholds, and the shelter, where they're given shelter, often by groups there, or are sort of subcontracted shelter by factions of the NSCN in that area. So I'm just saying, I'm just giving you examples of live situations. You know, and what is a COVID future, ladies and gentlemen? You're talking about 1% in India, 13 million people. It'll soon be 15 million. There are, you know, 64, look at, you know, where dislocation can take us. According to the 2011 census, which has been reiterated by, in the Rajya Sabha in 2016 by the minister at the time, Bandaru Dattaraya, 65 million households in urban slums. This is only going to grow. Displaced, and the number of displaced are in tens of millions, 70 million over the years. Landless peasantry, landless people in rural India, more than 140 million, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the numbers we're talking about here. Look at potential pools of negative energy we're talking about here. And then, you know, we had the boom times because industrial India, urban India, absorbed these vast migratory forces over time. And now there's a reverse migration. And it'll take several years to mend. It's not going to happen in 6 months to a year. We need to manage this negative energy in the meantime. Our policymakers need to. We as citizens of India need to. Otherwise, we're looking at socio-economic catastrophe, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm not being paranoid here. If in your hearts and your minds, you need to recognize this. And there's radicalization, there's social dislocation, there's you name it, and then people can just feed off negative energies. What does it take for a holy bakery to happen in Dhaka? Boom, radicalization, a few urban radicals, and you have an entire country perception going down the drain overnight, over the space of 3 days. It takes nothing. You have rebellions, you have radicalization, you have poverty, you have indignities, restlessness. And this is basically your COVID present, which can escalate to a COVID future or a post-COVID future. And I want to keep this here. And I'll stop here, Anirudh and friends. And I just wanted to give you this snapshot, and I'd be happy to take any concerns or questions you have, any thoughts that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. That's quite an eye-opener, honestly, this presentation. I think you highlighted a lot of things that were touched upon when the lockdowns initially started. You heard a number of really heart-rending stories about migrant dislocation, but that's a conversation that really seems to have fallen by the wayside as the country heads towards reopening. So thank you so much for highlighting all these issues. Now we only have about 10 minutes, and I have a bunch of questions for you as well. But let's just first take stuff from the audience.
Okay.
To begin with, of course, I'm sure is the question that's on everybody's lips after hearing this appraisal of the situation. What really can we do from Dipankar? What is the strategy that can be adopted in order to... Please go ahead.
See, the empathy and communication. I know this sounds like, you know, left liberal, Bolshi, Jholawala kind of solutions, but the fact is that if you look beyond the rhetoric, if you look beyond sometimes the bump, or if I may speak French, the bullshit sometimes you hear in the rhetoric, where you have good empathy, good management, good communication, clarity in dealing with the COVID crisis, is where you have sort of maximum stability, as we speak, where people are being simply treated with clarity of communication and with empathy and with clear lines of governance, with clear lines of delivery. This has to continue as the first step. This is very, very clear. If you are dealing with COVID, doesn't mean your governance stops. Governance has to continue. When you're dealing with empathy and clarity and communication rather than bump and rhetoric and propaganda, and you're bringing in governance, you also have to, in parallel, the third parallel, you have to keep your aspects to how to minimize conflict, how to deal with rebellions, how to deal with distress. So you need to bring peace talks back on board with the Nagas, for instance. And for heaven's sake, if you can talk peace with the Nagas who wanted to break away from India, and a core still wants to, why can't you talk? I've been saying this for years. Why can't you initiate peace talks with the Maoist rebels who don't want to break away from India at all? They are Indians. So if you can talk to people who want to break away, why can't you talk peace with people who are resolutely Indian? Maoist is just a tag. There's nothing Mao about the Maoist rebellion. It's just like a moniker. That's all it is. So I think 3-4 things need to go hand in hand. And Dipankar, what can I say? Again, it sounds very left liberal, but actually it's blindingly obvious that it's governance and policy initiatives and policy execution in multiple streams, in lateral streams that need to work together to cope with this crisis. Or we are actually looking at a pretty poor situation. Anirudh.
Sudeep, before I ask you the next question, could I just request you to stop screen share so we can see your video on full screen?
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Thank you for reminding me that I'm a boomer, Anirudh.
Well, that I suppose makes me a zoomer. So building on what you just said, Sudeep, in terms of the fact that empathy and clarity of communication is so much more important than propaganda and the use of hashtags.
Yeah.
I'd actually like to connect that to something that you said far earlier, in terms of how the term urban Naxal has kind of been developed, right? So it's very obviously not necessarily something that's actually meant to deal with actual urban Naxals, but rather a means to kind of to act on political vindictiveness, as you said. Which brings me to the question of, we know fairly well how India's powers that be have made use of hashtags, have made use of the fact that more people have access to cheap smartphones, cheap, easily accessible data. But how really have the actual Maoists of the country taken to social media? How are they using it as a tool for approval?
Well, the thing is that they use social media in a limited way. Earlier, simply because of communications clampdown and because of security clampdowns. For instance, one of the key websites that the Maoists use, called bansort.net, has been proscribed by the government of India. So in fact, you can try, all of you, type http://bansort.net, NET. It will say that DOT compliance, DOT prevents you from going there, so they block the site. But that gave you their propaganda, certainly, but crucially, it also gave you their point of view, which you need to know. Even if you come from the cynical angle or the practical angle of combating the rebellion, you need to be able to figure out where to go. Social networks have not really aided the Maoists, the rebellion in a great extent, because the lines have been made to blur by the governments, various state governments and by the government of India, where even social criticism, even socio-political criticism has been interpreted as a direct threat to the integrity of the nation, which is all wrong. And that is how hashtag, urban Naxal hashtag has been created and used and misused to a great extent. So the irony is that the real urban Naxals are lying low. And the left liberal who's not Naxal at all, who's not Maoist at all, many of them, dozens and dozens of them, are nowhere near Maoist, nowhere near /Naxal. They're in the net, they're in jail, just for political criticism, legitimate political criticism. And who knows, by me saying this out loud, maybe I'd be up next, and maybe I'm buying indemnity by going live and saying this over you, because one never knows today where the next penny drops. So this is the issue. So the critical thing, the crucial thing to keep in mind is that the Maoists are not dumb people. They're not foolish people. So they themselves recognize that in urban India, it is very, very difficult for them to penetrate into urban areas, because like they have in rural areas, because there is much more policing of urban areas. The military centers are near urban areas. It is far more difficult for underground movement to operate in an urban setting in modern India, where the move has been to the economic priorities, the economic momentum, the political momentum has been for empowerment, for awareness, for economic liberalization, for jobs, for employment, and therefore empowerment in its fullest sense, in a multiple sense. When you are getting bread and butter, when you're getting livelihood, you don't really think about rebelling. But when you lose it, then you're talking about a shock, a future shock, to paraphrase Alvin Toffler's old phrase, and then what happens when the negative energies begin to creep into urban space, forget the rural space for now, then you will have a situation when the true urban Naxals, the hashtag urban Naxals, like they're supposed to be, then they will be the ones moving along, doing the things according to their urban perspective plan and so on and so forth, which I shared with you earlier, or you all earlier, and then come out of their crawl spaces and then do what they need to do. But right now, the Democrat is being made into the hashtag urban Naxal, which is a travesty, which is wrong, and which is an irony of the greatest sense, because it is right to information, democracy, empowerment, the right to criticize the government and questioning, to my mind, which has been the greatest disincentive to join the Maoist rebellion in the first place. It is because India has become more democratic, not anymore, mind you, but it had for some years. It looked like we had, because the political liberalization and sort of coming out of the shell of what we call true democracy and accountability is actually the greatest key to reducing rebellion, when you have no hope, no answer, no accountability, boom, you cross over. So I would urge more democracy. I would urge more openness. I would urge more clarity and communication, because it's good for the integrity of India, of any country. Anirudh.
Absolutely agreed, Sudeep. I mean, one thing that concerns me, at the risk of being labeled an urban Naxal myself, is that the government simply does not see the fact that accountability and democracy is important to managing all kinds of insurgent movements, and seems to have calculated instead that it can manage socio-economic problems through propaganda and social media use, which should, of course, rightfully concern all free-thinking and democratically spirited Indians.
I agree.
We're running extremely low on time now, so very briefly, one final question from Gaurav Jabali. One should always keep communication channels open, but what would the contours of a political package in left-wing extremism impacted areas look like, and why would the left-wing extremist organizations accept it?
Well, actually, that's an excellent question, and it comes in typically this, and I have to be very brief about this, but it's a very complicated, it's a loaded question with a complicated answer. There was a major peace process back in 2003, 2004, which actually the government of Andhra Pradesh at the time led with CPI MLPW and its associates, i.e. the PW group, the PWG, as they were called as a conglomerate at that point of time. And they had several meetings. They came above ground, They met in Hyderabad several times, and they put forward demands. They said, free the prisoners, stop your operations, so on and so forth, and don't proscribe us. And they wanted a ceasefire for a certain period of time, and slowly sort of a gradual integration into the particular process. Meanwhile, what happened is that the CPI-PW realized that it was, I'm saying this because of a template which had been tried before, which didn't work. And that there was an absence of trust because because they didn't really trust each other. And Andhra Pradesh government at that time was playing its own game. I think the PWG was playing its own game. They were talking to MCCI at that time, trying to get that joint venture going, which came through in 2004. Demands began to be seen as too much to deal with on both sides. The peace process went for a toss, and conflict resumed in a huge manner. There was a backtracking of peace. In 2010, when Mr. Chidambaram was the Minister of Home Affairs, there was a concerted effort, or some effort, at a national level in concert with states as well, to have a chat with by then the CPI Maoist. Again, seize operations, pull out your troops, give land to the landless, and actually many things that were actually given over through RTI, given over through land redistribution in these various states in any case. So it wasn't really very extreme. There was a disagreement about, there was even a ceasefire for a few weeks. There was disagreement about pulling troops out completely, which the Maoists wanted, and releasing of all prisoners. But before it could come to a negotiating stage, there was one of the spokespersons of the CPI Maoist at that time, who went by the nom de guerre of Azad, his real name is Cherukuri Rajkumar, was actually arrested in Nagpur station and spirited away. The government denies this. And then he was later found dead. The body was dumped in the forest, in the jungles. So and he was a spokesperson who was actually like a dove for the CPI Maoists. And since 2010, there hasn't been a concerted peace process. Can you imagine that we've signed a peace deal with rebels in the Northeast by saying, come under the Constitution, give up your arms, keep your recruitment going, you can maintain arms, you can do your parallel administration, you continue with your extortion, you can do all of the above, but you haven't even acknowledged, you haven't even given that acknowledgement to your rebels. And now you're talking about a peace process in which you're trying to get people above ground, give them seats in Nagaland, extra, with delimitation, increase the legislature, make it a bicameral legislature, give more seats for the rebel leadership to come in, integrate the rebel cadre into industrial security forces like CISF, into state police, even into the army, like they did in Nepal with the Maoist movement. I mean, please remember that in our neighborhood, the Maoist movement in Nepal went from 0 to 100 between 2006 to 2016, when there was a peace deal. And now the Maoists are fully integrated. You had the former Maoist chief, Prachanda, who became the prime minister twice over, for heaven's sake. You had Baburam Bhattarai, his deputy, also become the prime minister. So it can happen. Why not here? No, I'm not saying that they're going to be, I'm not saying that we're looking at a political reality where Basava Raju is going to be the next prime minister of the country in the foreseeable future. But for heaven's sake, he can be, if you can talk to the Naga rebel leadership or the Manipuri level leadership, you have example up north in Nepal of a successful conclusion and integration of a raging Maoist rebellion, one of the most acute in the world. Why can't you do it here? Why can't you be thinking like that over here? So, it is possible. I don't think, but are we putting our thinking caps on? I don't think so. We're talking about samadhan without looking for a samadhan. An acronym is not a solution. That is it. So there are templates, there are approaches. I think it is way past expiry for when we need to be talking peace. We need to be reaching out for the Maoist rebellion for the sake of India, for heaven's sake, for our sakes, not for the sake of Mao Zedong, who's in Beijing, a waxy figure, wearing a very poorly stitched brown suit, looking swollen as ever, and completely discredited in history and politics. And for heaven's sake, let's grow up, India, let's grow up.
on that note, Sudeep, thank you so much for this really mind-opening conversation. Nitin has just put a little comment saying thank you for joining us, thank you for this enlightening conversation, and thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us and for spending an hour on your Friday evening with us. We hope to see you again in future Takshila events, and I hope to see you again as well in future Takshila events. Sudeep. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye. Are we off?
Yes, we are just going off.